Welcome, boys and girls, to Rite TV for Kids. I'm your host, Paula Fine, and you're watching the Kid Channel. Parents and families, a quick reminder, our Rite TV program guides, you can pick one up in any activity center. Wonderful programming for kids on Channel 4 and Channel 12, wonderful parenting shows. So pick one up today. Now, boys and girls, we are here in the first floor activity center, and we only have one special little girl in here. So please bring your legs, if you can, to the first floor activity center and come and join us. But if not, keep watching Channel 4. Special treat, the United States Postal Service has been sponsoring a gentleman who is a mail carrier for the Postal Service, and starting last year for the Red Ribbon Month, he actually wrote his own book, which he's going to share with you, and also he's going to be telling some special stories. So let's welcome John Losney.
Thank you. How is everybody doing today? Well, as she mentioned, my name is John. Now, some of you I may have a little trouble hearing, but I need to know your names too. So when I count to 3, I want everybody to tell me your name. 1, 2, 3. Tell me. All right. And I even heard some of you way back over there. Now, before I tell you a story or two, I'm going to introduce you to a friend of mine. You see him here? No, I don't see him. But he's hiding. He's hiding because he's a little shy. He's a little bit embarrassed. You see, last September, a year ago, I started traveling all around the country. Started out in Washington, D.C., went up and met the president and told him some stories, and then went up to Alaska and Oregon and New York and Chicago and Puerto Rico and all around. And everywhere I went, this friend of mine went with me. And when we started out, he was like this tall and this wide. That's a pretty good-sized guy. But my friend is a picky eater. In fact, he's the world's pickiest eater. He only eats one thing. Now, I'm going to look real hard at this camera. Raise your hand if you're a picky eater. I see you. Okay. Yeah, there's a few of you in there. Well, yeah, and one right here, too. Well, my friend only eats one thing, and that's grits. And I'm sure there's plenty of people here that eat grits. And they're easy to get in Georgia or South Carolina, like where I'm from. But can you imagine going to New York, like my friend and I did the other day? We went to New York, and we walked in and sat down, and the waitress said, "Can I take your order, please?" And my friend said, "I want a big bowl of grits." And the waitress said, "What's grits?" And my friend said, "You don't have any? I'm not going to eat anything." And he did. Oh, by the way, can you hold that for me? There we go. And so my friend, since he didn't eat, he started getting skinnier and smaller and skinnier and smaller and skinnier and smaller and till finally he got so little. Everywhere I go now, he travels in this bag here with me. And this is what happens if you're a picky eater, like my friend Slim. Start looking like this. Now, when Slim was younger, I'm sure your mother's told you the same thing his mother told him. She said, "Slim, don't ever play near the road." And of course, you always listen to your parents, but Slim didn't. In fact, one day he went down, put his toes right on the edge of the road, and he looked around to see if anybody was watching. Moved a little closer. A little closer. And then one day, little school bus came by. Ran over his feet. Now look how big those feet are for that little bitty guy. I'd like to buy tennis shoes for those things. Huh? Well, Slim's going to sit here, and he's going to listen to stories, but I have to talk to him for just a minute. Slim, do not flirt with the nurses when they come by, okay? He's always doing it. Now, can you tell me what kind of fur do you think this is? Rabbit. What do you think? Fox, okay. Rabbit, and that guy in the room 213 said duck. No, it is not a duck. Okay. And this one, what is this? What do you think? A bear. Bear, okay. And somebody, what? Beaver, okay. Squirrel, fox. Of course, that girl that said rabbit over there, she's right too. This is a rabbit. Now you notice, though, that these furs are not the same, are they? They look the same to you, do they? How about you? No. See, your camera's waving his head no. He doesn't know they're the same. They're different. They're different colors. They're different shapes. They're different sizes. This one is a lot thicker than this one, isn't it? See how much thicker it is? Yeah. But you know what I found out? That whenever I skinned these rabbits, even though they look totally different on the outside, on the inside, they're almost exactly the same. And that's a lot like people. You know, your skin is so thin that if you stretched it out sideways and held it between your fingers, you'd have a hard time even seeing it. That's how thin it is. And that's the major difference between every person, is that little layer of skin. Some people it's different colors, and some people are different shapes and different sizes, but all those differences are still mainly just in the way they look. And if you take the skin off, but we won't do that, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, we'll leave your skin on. Take the skin off, we would find that on the inside that everybody is almost exactly the same. So keep that in mind. That's a good story to learn from rabbits about how different things can be and how the same they are. Now, I'm going to show you this book here, The Red Ribbon, Story of Hope. This was a book that I wrote 2 years ago now, and this was written for an organization called National Family Partnership. And National Family Partnership is the group that, those of you who are school age, you've probably taken part in Red Ribbon Celebration, which takes place every October. It's a drug prevention program because, you know, a lot of people have to use drugs because they're sick, like some of you are. My daughter takes 25 pills a day to keep from having seizures. And so I know there's good drugs and there's bad drugs. But you know, of course, that people can even abuse good drugs by not using them right. You know, if you took 327 aspirin for a headache, you're going to be in trouble. So, you know, the goal is to help people to understand that when you do use something good, then that's good. But you can use even good things bad. But you definitely don't want to use things that are bad to start out with. And that's the way some drugs are. But this book is a story, and I'm not going to tell this story, but this story is going to be here at the hospital. And I think that maybe in a couple weeks somebody might read it. But I'm going to just show you, if the camera can get kind of a little bit close-up stuff here, some of the pictures in here. This story is about a king. And you like to draw? Yeah, a lot of you do. I can't draw. I was the only person that flunked drawing crooked lines in art class. I don't know how you do that, but I did. But my friend, Mr. Greg Ramsey, did all the artwork in the book here, and he used chalk. Can you imagine drawing like that with chalk? That's quite something. But he used what's called pastel chalks and did all these drawings. Spent about 900 hours doing the artwork. Now, that's a long time. That's probably about as long as some of you spend on your homework every year. Yeah, right. Well, anyway, but if you did, you would be really smart. But Mr. Ramsey did all the artwork, and of course, Greg was not a really perfect artist when he was little. He had to practice. And as he practiced every day, that practicing made him better. And the better he got, he began to see the results of practicing and working hard. And so he continued to do it more and more. And now he has a book out with beautiful artwork in it. So this book's going to stay here at the hospital. At where?
Max Brown.
Max Brown Family Library. Probably here at the hospital. Okay? And that's where it'll be. Now, also, I'm going to tell you a story in just a minute. And I'm going to leave here at the hospital this paper, which has this funny looking, oh, that's me. This paper, and inside is my address. And I'm going to tell you this story because I'm doing some more books. And those books, I decided, instead of using a professional artist like Mr. Ramsey to do the artwork, I'm going to use artwork from young people all over the country. And so what you can do, when I tell you the story, if you'd like to draw me a picture, draw a picture, put your name and your address and your age on the back of the picture, preferably, and then the hospital has my address, and send it to me. And when I do the next book, if you're really lucky, your picture might be in the next book, and you'll be like a world-famous artist. It'll be really cool. So I'm going to tell you a story about my grandfather. My grandfather, when he was like 81 years old, he still was driving. Now, he wasn't driving too well because he couldn't see past the hood of the car, and that was with his glasses on. But he had these big, thick glasses, and when he didn't have them on, he couldn't see anything. In fact, I remember one day I came around the corner, and there he was having this big, long conversation with a stop sign. He thought it was a skinny, red-headed guy standing there, and he didn't understand how come that guy wouldn't talk back to him. But, you know, my grandfather, when he drove like you've seen sometimes when real old people drive, they pull their seat all the way up so the steering wheel's like right on their stomach, and they can barely see over, and they drive like this. And my grandfather drove everywhere 35 miles an hour. On the freeway, you know, everybody's going by, he's driving along. And slowed down for corners. And he was only going 35 to start out with. But my grandfather decided one time that he was going to go visit his best friend, George, who lived down outside of Miami. Now, outside of Miami is where the Everglades are. And it's a lot of swamps down there. And George lived right at the edge of the swamp. So my grandfather decided to go down there and visit. Now, we tried to get him to take a bus or fly, but he wanted to drive. So like 2 weeks later, he finally made his way down there, going 35 miles, all the way down the road. And he got there, and he went to visit George. Now, George had two little chihuahuas. You know what they are, right? Yeah, they're like long-legged rats. That's what a chihuahua is, this rat with long legs. And these, you know how they sound? They always bark just like that, constantly. They bark at everything. They see their foot. See their tail. Bark at everything. Well, my grandfather was down at the house, and it was one night, late at night, and he was sound asleep. And he had taken his glasses off, and he had them set on the nightstand so that if he woke up, he'd have them and he could see where he was going. Well, right in the middle of the night, all of a sudden, the dogs started barking as loud as they could, and it woke my grandfather up. He sat up in the bed and reached for his glasses and knocked them off on the floor, and he felt all around, and he couldn't find them, and he decided to go ahead and go out and see what the dogs were barking at. Well, he walked out in the living room, and there were the two dogs, and they were standing at the screen door, just barking at the screen door. And my grandfather, he walked up there, you know, and he looked out the screen door, and he didn't have his glasses, remember. There was an 8-foot-long alligator laying on the front porch. And that's what the dogs were barking at. But my grandfather didn't have his glasses. He thought it was a giant lizard. He said, George, there's a giant lizard on the front porch. And those dogs were standing and barking. And I guess that alligator didn't like all that barking, so he came and busted right through the screen door, right through between my grandfather's legs in the house, chasing the dogs. And my grandfather said, George, the alligator is a lion lizard, and the dogs, everybody's in the house. And the dogs were running all around, and they were barking and yelling, and my grandfather was running after them. And the alligator got the dogs cornered in the kitchen. And he was just getting ready to eat them. He was and he was getting ready to eat them. And my grandfather grabbed the broom, and he started beating on him and said, Get out of the house, you stupid lizard. And he's beating on the alligator. And the alligator turned around and went to bite my grandfather, and my grandfather smacked him right on the end of the nose. The alligator decided he better get out of there. So he took off, and he's running around the house. And my grandfather's running behind him with the broom, boom, 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 beating on him. And it woke George up. And George came up, and he opened the door, and he said, What's going on? And my grandfather, boom, knocked him down. And finally, he got that alligator in the corner and killed him. Knocked him clean out cold. And then he grabbed that alligator by the tail, slung his tail over his shoulder, and drug him back to the screen door. And threw him out the screen door. And he rolled down the steps and fell out there in the yard. And when he did, he woke up. And when that Alligator woke up, looked up there. There was my grandfather standing at the top of the stairs with that broom, and he's going, "And don't you come back no more!" And that alligator, and he was gone. Now, I learned a very important lesson from that, you see. I learned, don't ever get around my grandfather whenever he didn't have his glasses, because there's no telling what he might think you were, and that could be bad news. Now, if you'd like to send me some pictures about that story, remember, I'm leaving this here. It's got my address and everything in it, and you can send them to me, okay? Now, I want to tell you about a town. It was kind of a different kind of town. In this town, nobody had ever heard the word help before. In fact, nobody did it. Nobody helped anybody with anything. It wasn't even in their dictionary. And it was a very strange place to live. One day, the farmer was out plowing his field, and a man came by driving in a buggy. He got right next to the farmer's house, and the wheel fell off the buggy. Well, the farmer was going along, and he stopped, and he looked over, and there was that buggy and the wheel laying on the ground, and the man was trying to put it back on. And he would reach up, and he'd lift that wagon up, and then he'd grab the wheel. And when he grabbed the wheel, the wagon fell back down. So he'd pick up the wagon again, and he'd go, every time. And the farmer, he's plowing along in his field, and he says, "Boy, that guy's having a lot of trouble over there," but he never even thought to go help him. He'd never heard the word, remember? So he just kept plowing his field. Well, the man tried all day long to get the wheel back on the wagon, and he couldn't do it. Finally, he got so tired, he climbed up in the wagon and went to sleep. That night, a very strange thing happened all over the countryside. People woke up to the sound of whoop, 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 whoop. And when they went and looked out the windows the next morning, all over were big, huge boulders, big rocks. They were in the road, they were in the fields, they were all over the place. And the farmer, he got up and he said, "Man, look at that. That's going to make it hard to plow." And so he went out there and he hooked his plow up, and it was very difficult because his mule couldn't go but about 3 feet, and then there was a big old rock. And then he'd have to go around it. And he'd go a little further, and there'd be another rock. Well, the guy in the wagon, he woke up the next morning, and he went right back to trying to put his wheel back on. The farmer was out there, and he kept going around the rocks. And finally, he said, "I've got to move these things." And so he started pushing and shoving as hard as he could, but he wasn't strong enough to move it by himself. The man with the wagon stood over there and said, "Boy, that farmer's got a lot of rocks in his field. Too bad he can't get them out." Never even thought about helping. It wasn't in the dictionary. All day long, the farmer was trying and shoving and pushing on those rocks, and all day long, the man was trying to put the wagon wheel back on. Neither one of them got anything done. It was getting kind of late in the afternoon when suddenly a stranger came walking down the road. And he stood there and he watched the man trying to put the wheel back on his wagon. And he saw the farmer out there trying to plow around those big old rocks that he couldn't move by himself. He walked up to the man with the wagon and he said, "Would you like some help?" And the man with the wagon said, "What's help?" "Well, that's like, I help you put the wheel." I never heard of that word before. "You've never heard of help?" He says, "No, what does it mean?" He said, "Here, let me show you." And the man reached over and he lifted up the wagon and he said, "Now, put the wheel back on." And the man stood there and he said, and he got the wheel and he stuck it back on and he said, "Golly, I never thought about that. That helping stuff's pretty cool." And the man would help with the wagon. He said, "You know, that farmer out there could use some help." He goes, "You mean you do that kind of thing all the time? I mean, you just go and help people?" I said, "Why, yes, you can help anybody you want anytime." He goes, don't know. Let's go give it a try. So the two men walked out there where the farmer was shoving on the rock, and they said, would you like some help? And the farmer said, some what? Some help. He said, what's it taste like? No, you don't eat it. You give it and you get it. He said, I don't get it. He said, here, let me show you. So the two men got up next to the rock and he told the farmer, push. And all three of them, and guess what? They started pushing, and those boulders just boom, 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 rolled right out of the field. And the farmer said, golly, look at that. That's something. And they got another rock, and pretty soon they cleared the whole field out. Well, the stranger said to the farmer and the man who owned the wagon, let's go see if we can find some other people to help. Well, they loaded up in the wagon, and the man took off. They went a little ways down the road, and they heard a noise. They heard somebody yelling, I can't get out. And they looked over, and there was a house, and in front of the front door and in front of the back door was a big boulder, and there was an old woman who lived inside. And she was trying to open the doors, but she couldn't open them because the rocks were in the way. And she was out, I can't get out. And the men stopped the wagon, and one of them yelled, would you like some help? And the woman said, what's it smell like? It doesn't smell like anything. It's just, it's help. You give it, and you get it. She said, I don't think I've got any in here. He said, no, we're going to help you. And they went over, and they rolled that big old boulder from in front of the door. And the old woman opened the door, and she said, golly, look at that. I never heard of such a thing. Well, she was so happy that they had helped her, she baked an apple pie this big around. And they loaded it in the wagon with the man who was the farmer and the man who owned the wagon and the stranger and the lady in her apple pie, and they headed to town. Well, on the way to town, they must have stopped and helped 50 people. And by the time that wagon got to town, it was loaded, and people were walking all behind and everything. And they were all finding out about this new thing called helping. And they thought it was pretty cool. And everybody started helping everybody else. Now, there were a lot of rocks and a lot of boulders, and they rolled them all into a big, huge pile. It was almost a mountain. And people would come from miles around to that town just to see this thing that they called help. And they went back to their towns, and they told them, you'll never believe what I saw. I saw people helping. And they said, well, what's it feel like? Well, it feels pretty good, actually. I mean, you can't feel it on your skin, but you can feel it in here. And so other people started helping each other. And that big old mountain of rocks, why, they named it Help Mountain. And people would come from miles around just to stand and look at a big pile of rocks that had changed all the people that lived in the whole country. They learned about helping. That is a neat mountain. Now, would you like a ghost story? Would you get scared? You wouldn't get scared at this one. If you get scared out there, just put your pillow over your head, but leave a space to breathe, because you don't want, I can't breathe in here. Okay? This is a story about an old man and an old woman who lived way up in the mountains. And what do you get a lot of in the mountains? What do you get a lot of in the mountains? In the wintertime. White stuff. Snow, exactly right. And I tell you what, this winter, the snow, why, it would have covered you 3 times. It was the biggest snow they had ever seen. In fact, it covered the whole cabin up to the roof. Now, the old man and the old woman were in this cabin, and they were kind of trapped. And they ate almost every single bit of their food, and used almost every single piece of firewood. And one day they had eaten every speck of food, and there was one piece of wood left. They had gone days without eating. They were getting very hungry. And they kept staring at that one piece of wood. But they were kind of afraid to use their last piece of wood. Finally, the old man said, "Wife, I've got to get out of this cabin and go find us something to eat. I've got to go shoot a deer or something." And so he opened the cabin door, and it was just a solid sheet of snow. But he began to dig and dig and dig and dig until finally he dug a tunnel all the way up to the top. He came back down and he said, "Old woman," not that you are, of course, "I'm going to go get us something to eat. But don't you use that last piece of firewood. Because if you do, I won't have any way to cook the meat when I get back." And left. Well, as soon as he left, his wife said, "Huh, who's that old man think he is, telling me I can't burn that firewood? It's cold in here. He might not ever come back. I'll use that wood if I want to." And she went over and she put that last piece of firewood in the fireplace. And she lit it. And it started burning. And oh, it felt good because it was cold and it was so nice and warm in that fire. And she got closer and she was warming her hands. She said, "Oh, this fire feels good." And she, this tastes pretty good. And she started eating. She was very hungry. And she ate one finger, 2 fingers, 3 fingers, her hand, her arm, her shoulders, till finally she had eaten herself all up, and there was nothing left but a skeleton, just like old Slim here. And she went and sat in the corner and waited. After a while, her husband came back, and he had a big deer over his shoulders. And he came into the snow, and he looked over there at the fireplace, and there was just a few little pieces of embers left from that last piece of wood. And he said, boom! He laid that deer down. He said, "Old woman, I told you not to burn that last piece of firewood. Now I have nothing to cook the meat." And out of the shadows, a voice came. "That's okay. I like my meat raw." And then she came out of the corner, walking toward it. And that guy said, "I'm out of here!" Out the door, and he started running as fast as he could. But it's kind of like the monster movies on television. He ran as fast as he could, and the skeleton was just going boom, boom, boom. But she was always right behind him. No matter how fast he ran, there she was. Boom, boom, boom. And he ran until he could barely run anymore. And finally, he came into a clearing. And he ran through the clearing, and there at the edge of the clearing was a big, wide cliff, a canyon. 1,000 feet down to the bottom, straight down, and no way to get across. And he could hear in the bushes, in the woods, coming. He looked up on top of the hill, and there was a cabin. And he ran up to that cabin, and he knocked on the door, and this old woman came to the door. She had a big wart on the end of her nose. And she came and she said, "Can I help you?" And he said, my wife's coming through the woods, and she's going to eat me. Please help me." And the old woman said, I can help you, but it'll cost you something." "I don't have it." He said, "I tell you what, I'll help you if you promise to stay with me as long as you live and cut all my firewood, do all my chores, and pick all the crops and get the water." Well, what was the man going to do? Because as he turned around, he could see her coming through the woods after him. He couldn't get across that big old opening, so he said, I'll do it. This woman knew magic. She walked down to the edge of the cliff. She said a few magic words, and she began to grow. Till she had grown so tall, she simply reached over and stretched out across the cliff. And she said to the man, "Hurry up, come on over." Oh, the man was so tired he could barely walk, but he finally made his way across and fell into the snow. He was safe, which was a good thing because he couldn't run one more step. Now the old woman said another magic word when she shrunk back down. But as soon as she did, out of the woods stepped the skeleton woman. And she walked right up to that woman and said, "I saw what you did. You get me across that place or I'll eat you." Oh, the old woman said, "All right." And she said a magic word and she began to grow again. She stretched herself across to the other side. And then the old skeleton woman began to come across. The old man was laying on the other side, and what was he going to do? He didn't have enough strength to get up and run. And he thought, "Oh, no, I'm going to die." And the old skeleton woman got right about in the middle. And the magic lady said, "Oh, those bony old feet tickle. Oh, I don't think I can stay still. Those things just..." And the old said, "No, don't do that." Boom. Hit the bottom, and those old bones busted into 1,000 pieces in every direction. Well, the old man made his way back across. He was true to his word. He lived with that old woman for the rest of his life, and he cut all of her firewood. He did all the chores. He picked all the crops. He gathered everything and got the water in it from as long as he lived. Now, sometimes very late at night, you could hear it when it would be very quiet. You'd hear those bones dragging themselves back together so that one day they can climb back up that cliff. And if that happens, there's one thing for sure. You don't want to be there. You're a jumpy little lady. Now, how about a story about everybody's favorite pet? You got a pet? No. No? You got a pet?
I'm going to get one.
What are you going to get?
A turtle.
A turtle. Turtles are very good because if they try to run away, it's no problem catching them. I mean, you can give them a big head start. Say, "Don't you go out of this yard." You can come back 2 days later and you can still catch them before they get out of the yard. So that's a good choice. And they don't like chew up your curtains and stuff either. Okay, so that's a good choice. Do you have a pet? What, you got, a giraffe? No? A what? Okay, a snow moth. And do you have a pet? What do you got?
What do you have?
A doggy or a kitty or a elephant? A dog. Those are good pets, but not as good as the pet I'm thinking of. Wouldn't you like to have a skunk for a pet? No. I mean, wouldn't that be a good pet?
No.
Well, some people don't like skunks because they do have a problem with body odor sometimes. They stink. But I'm going to tell you a story about a nice skunk. Not that all skunks aren't nice, but this skunk had a little problem. You see, he loved all the animals, and he wanted to play with them, and he wanted to be their friends and all. But unfortunately, every time he would come out to play, when the other animals would be out there, he'd come out, and the animals would go,
"Stinky, stinky, go away. We don't want you here to play."
Now, you think that hurt his feelings? Yeah, of course it did. I mean, his ears would flop down, his tail would flop down, his lip would poke out, and he'd walk away. Oh, but one day, a big old bobcat came down out of the tree. He went right up to the rabbit and he said, "Tomorrow, when I get hungry, I'm coming back to eat you." Then he went over to the squirrel and said, "And when I get through with him, I'm going to eat you." Then he went over to the chipmunk and said, "I'll have you for dessert." And when he got ready to leave, he said, "Don't worry, I'll be back tomorrow." And as soon as he left, all the animals said, "We're going to die." And they were so upset, they didn't even notice when Stinky came walking up. And Stinky came up and he said, "What's the matter?" Said, "What's the matter? What's the matter? We're going to, you don't have to worry. Nobody ever eats a skunk." Well, that's true. I mean, have you ever gone to McDonald's and say, "I'd like a skunk McBurger, please"? No, I don't think so. Stinky said, "Well, I guess then it's not always so bad to smell like a skunk. But who wants to smell like a skunk?" But Stinky said, "Think about it. You could smell like a skunk or be in the belly of a bobcat." Ooh, not much of a choice, right? So the animals all lined up in a row, and Stinky came by. Psh, psh, psh. Ooh, did they smell? The next day when that bobcat came down out of the trees, he said, "All right, ready to have me some rabbit. I'm going to, oh my gosh, what a smelly rabbit." Said, "That's okay. I like squirrel better anyway. I'll have me a nice oh my gosh, what a smelly squirrel." Hey, but sometimes you like dessert first, right? Yeah. "I'll just have me a little old dessert. Oh my gosh, what a smelly chipmunk." Said, "Y'all are a bunch of stinkies." And he turned around and he ran away and he never came back again. Now the animals were very happy. They hadn't been eaten. And who had saved them? Stinky the skunk. So they wanted to be his friend, but there was one problem. When they went down to the river and took a bath, they didn't smell anymore. But guess who still did? Stinky. Because Stinky was a skunk. In fact, if Stinky took 1,000 baths, he would still be a skunk. That would never change. But what were the animals going to do? They wanted to be his friend, but they couldn't stand the way he smelled. But finally, the chipmunk, who was very smart for her size, came up with an idea. She went over to the farmer's house and she borrowed 3 clothespins. Came back, clipped one on the rabbit's nose, clipped one on the squirrel's nose, clipped one on her own nose. Then they went over to Stinky's house. They stood outside and they said,
"Stinky, Stinky, come out and play. We promise we won't run away."
Stinky came out, and you wouldn't believe it. They found out he was the best player in the whole entire forest. He could jump higher, run faster, climb a tree, hit a baseball. He could do anything better than it. Now guess who was the first animal that was picked when they picked teams? Stinky. All right. Now the animals learned a very important lesson that day. You see, they learned that sometimes you can't wait for somebody else to change before you decide to be their friend. Because how long would they have had to wait for Stinky to stop being a skunk? Forever, exactly. No matter what happened, he would always be a skunk. So if they waited for him to stop being a skunk to be his friend, they would never have him for a friend. Now, it wasn't necessarily comfortable, wearing a clothespin on their nose every time they played with Stinky. But they found out it was worth it to have him for a friend. Now, sometimes you're going to come in contact and you're going to meet people, and there's something about them maybe you just don't like. Maybe it's something they can change. Maybe you don't like the clothes they wear. Now, they could change their clothes, right? Maybe you don't like the fact that they're 2 feet taller than you. Not much you can do about that, right? I mean, if you're growing the same speed they are, how long are you going to wait for you're taller than them? Forever. Just like the animals, sometimes you have to be willing to be the one to change yourself first. Now, some cases, it may just be an attitude. It may just be the way that you think about things that you have to change. Some cases, maybe you have to change the things you do or the places you go in order to have somebody for a friend. But you may find that it's well worth it to have them, because you may end up with the best friend you've ever had in your whole life. Okay? Thank you very much. Y'all are a great audience here, and thank you out there, too.
Okay. Boys and girls, let's give John Losney a big hand. I want to hear it in your rooms. Yay. First of all, I want to thank the United States Postal Service, because they have these wonderful bags filled with coloring books and crayons, and they're going to be available to you. I don't know if you have enough time to deliver it to the rooms. If you're on a time restraint, we don't know.
I'm not sure.
But
We'll
kids,
have to
you
see.
will get them. If John doesn't come by and deliver them personally, somebody will. And also, boys and girls, something really cool. This is a pledge card from the Red Ribbon Coordinator, and what happens is you actually sign it. It's a pledge for you to lead a healthy, drug-free lifestyle for yourself, and that you were a part of Red Ribbon Week. And so you would tear it off and mail it to Washington, D.C., okay? So this is, and it's already paid for by the Postal Service. Isn't that great? So you can take that and fill it out, and it's called a pledge card. And I'm going to let you hold that for a
Okay.
minute. And also, I'm going to give something very special from us to you, John, because I think it's wonderful that you came out, and you can remember us here in Atlanta, Georgia.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And it's our very own Scottish Rite
All
shirt.
right.
Okay?
There's only one problem, though. Slim has a tendency to try to take stuff like that away from me.
Well, I don't think we have a
So
problem.
we'll see if it fits him or not. Nope, too big.
All right.
You can't wear it.
So, boys and girls, thank you so much for tuning into Rite TV for Kids. Thanks to the United States Postal Service, and thank you to John. And we wish you to get well soon, and we'll see you next week on Rite TV for Kids. Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in to Rite TV for Kids.